Hello everyone, Mrs. Gonzalez Clark again. We are going to continue our work with numeric expressions and evaluating these numeric expressions. We have a new problem that we're going to work on. I'm going to read the problem first. After I complete the first read, you guys are going to think about what situation is occurring in the problem. Okay, let me read the stem. Pay close attention. Lucia has 3.5, 3 and 5 tenths hours left in her workday as a car mechanic. Lucia needs half of an hour to complete one oil change. So pause your video and I want you to think about the situation that is occurring in this problem. Okay, awesome. So the situation that is occurring in this problem is that we have a lady named Lucia, and she's a car mechanic. She has a certain amount of days left in her workday, and she has to complete an oil change. So Lucia is a car mechanic that has a certain amount of hours left in her workday. She still has to complete an oil change. Okay, so that's our situation. I'm going to move this over to right here. And now we are going to read together for our second read. And after we complete the second read, I want you to think about the quantities that jumped out after we read it the second time. Okay, are we ready? Lucia has 3 and 5/10 hours left in her workday as a car mechanic. Lucia needs half of an hour to complete one oil change. So again, pause your video and think about what quantities do you think are important in this problem. Okay, so some quantities that stood out were 3, 5/10, 3.5, 3.5 hours. And another important quantity was half an hour. So those are two very important quantities that stood out. Let's move this over. Excellent. So we're going to read this problem together one more time, and then you guys are going to start thinking about your mathematical questions. Ready? Lucia has 3 5/10 hours left in her workday as a car mechanic. Lucia needs half of an hour to complete one oil change. So again, pause your video for a moment and start thinking about the mathematical questions you want to create based off of the problem. Great. So one mathematical question that we can ask is, how many oil changes can Lucia complete during the rest of her workday? Okay. Another question that we can ask is, how many oil changes can Lucia complete if she had 4 hours left to her workday? Okay, so these are two mathematical questions that we're going to try to answer based off of the work that we do to solve it. Okie dokie, so we had Lucia. Lucia is working, she's working hard, and she has 3.5 hours left in her workday. So we can read that as 3 and 5/10 hours left in her workday, or 3.5 hours left in her workday, right? So she's a car mechanic, she has this time left, but she has to make sure she completes one oil change before she leaves. In order to do an oil change, you need a half hour. So to complete an oil change, you need a half hour to do so. So we are going to see what that looks like. So we're taking 3.5. Pardon me. Okay. We are going to take 3. And we're going to see how many half hours can we get out of 3.5 hours. So we're going to take 3.5 hours and we're going to divide it into halves. And that's going to let us know how many half hours can we make out of 3.5 hours. So we're going to take that 3.5 hours and we're going to divide it by a half. Now, since we're working with a fraction on the right side, I'm just going to turn this 3 5/10 into a fraction, which is 3.5. So we're going to take 3.5 and we're going to divide it by a half. So let's see what that looks like as a visual. I'm going to make my diagram. And I'm going to have 3 holes in it. There's 1 hole, 2 holes, 1 hole, 2 holes, 3 holes, but then the fraction is 3.5. So I'm going to have to make 1 additional one. With the emphasis only on this half. We don't need this one because we need 3.5. Okay, so we have 1 hole, 2 holes, 3 holes, and then there's our half. Okay, so we're going to take this 3.5 and we're going to divide it into half. So I'm going to look at my first hole and I'm going to divide it in half. Now I'm going to take my second hole and I'm going to divide it in half. Then I'm going to take my third hole and I'm going to divide it in half. Now, how many halves do I have in all? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means 3.5 divided by a half gives us 7. So what does that tell us? That tells us that Lucia has 3.5 hours left. And if we took those 3.5 hours and we broke them up into halves, into half hours, we would be able to do that 7 times. Okay? Now let's go back to our mathematical questions. The first question is, how many oil changes can Lucia complete during the rest of her workday? So we did that. We took the 3.5 and we divided it into halves. We know that an oil change only takes half an hour. And we know that when we took the 3.5 hours, we have half hour here, another half hour, 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 and this half hour. So that means that Lucia can do 7 oil changes. Okay. Now, we were able to answer that question. Now, how many oil changes can Lucia complete if she had 4 hours left to her workday? So that means we represented the 3 holes here. And this here represented that additional half that went along with the 3.5. Now, if I didn't erase this, if I didn't X this out, that would have gave us 4 holes. So I'm just going to draw it all over again, though, so that you guys can actually see what's going on here. So now I'm going to make 4 holes. 1, 2, 3, and there's 4. Because now we're trying to answer our second mathematical question. What if she had 4 hours left to her day? Now we're going to take those 4 hours left to the workday, and again, we're going to split them in half. Because we're still dividing by a half. Now let's see how many oil changes can she make with 4 hours. So we have a half hour here, another half hour, another half hour, another one, another one, another one, another one, and another one. In total, that gives us 8. So if Lucia had 4 hours, she would be able to do 8 oil changes. So we were able to answer our second mathematical question. So what we did was we created an expression to help us to solve this problem. With the information we used to solve the first mathematical question, we were able to use that information to help us to solve the second mathematical question. And of course, using our models to help us in the process.